Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. A breakthrough agreement was reached at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP27, to provide loss and damage funding for vulnerable countries hit hard by climate disasters. Developing countries have for decades made strong appeals for the establishment of a loss and damage fund to compensate nations that are the most vulnerable to climate disasters, yet who've contributed little to the climate crisis. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres hailed it as a significant step, a much-needed political signal to rebuild broken trust. A package of other crucial decisions were also delivered by the countries at the annual climate conference that was set against a difficult geopolitical backdrop. So on the program today, we are going to discuss with experts some key outcomes of COP27, a quick analysis of what has been achieved and what more needs to be done to accelerate climate action. Pleased to welcome on this edition of Perspective an illustrious panel. With me in the studio is Dr. Vibha Dhawan, DG, the Energy and Resources Institute. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us on the program. And joining us virtually is Mr. K. Yatish Rajawat, Senior Journalist, Mr. Avinash Mohanty, Sector Head, Climate Change and Sustainability, IPE Global. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program as well. Dr. Dhawan, allow me to have the first word from you. What were the expectations from COP27 and was it able to meet at least some of the bigger expectations given the climate emergency that the world is reeling under?
You have just mentioned about that a fund has been allocated for loss and damage, and that was a demand that many of the countries were putting forth because they are suffering for no fault of theirs. So that is what has happened in the past. But in a way, I'll say my expectations from COP were much greater because we are talking of finance and nothing has actually come on the table. And here again, it is a sort of promise that yes, we'll look into it, but we haven't worked out even the details of what is loss and damage and in what way these countries will be compensated. And really speaking, do you think that the countries which have suffered due to the changing climate, was hit by the changing climate, can you bring back lives? So many people have lost their lives. We have lost the entire ecosystem, biodiversity, that cannot be compensated with money. And when you say that have we achieved, I'll say there should have been much greater discussions how to stop or reduce the pace at which climate change is occurring. So there were very little discussions on that aspect.
Okay, Mr. Mohanty, since you were also present at COP27, the world entered, this particular climate summit with a lot of expectations given the climate crisis that the countries world over are facing today. But the fact that loss and damage agreement happens to be the only big thing to boast about, other things, there were several other crucial decisions that took a backstage. Nevertheless, we'll come to all of these aspects one by one. Your opinion on the loss and damage agreement, the finer details that have emerged, and climate finance is something that has been in the talks for several years. Nothing concrete has happened. Do you see the loss and damage agreement also going the similar way? So lots of talk, but nothing concrete on ground?
I don't agree more to what Dr. Dhawan just outlaid it. The COP27 process or the COP process in general until now has been a testament to broken promises and pledges. But the historic agreement to establish loss and damage facility, it proved what collective countries and collective action can fetch and how results can come together. So that's the best brand or outcome where people and planet have been addressed in a way or other. So the loss and damage facility that has been promised to be created is going to fetch us results. But the kind of nuts and bolts need to be ironed out. And it is only going to be operational by 2023. Then there is a transitional committee who is going to come out, work with the nuts and bolts and come up with an operational. But the Santiago network adoption is a big victory, I would say. There is some sort of concurrence that something is going to come out, not greenwashed as far as loss and damage is concerned. The second point is that few countries have come together. Denmark, Sweden, so on and so forth have come together to kind of provide some sort of voluntary funding to the whole concept of loss and damage and kind of support the vulnerable hit countries. But this can't be charity. We need to have conquered money. There is a bucket, we need to fill it up. And that has to be filled with full because research estimates suggest that $500 billion is required every year by the vulnerable hit countries. And we can't just ignore these numbers, number one. Number two is if you want to avert your loss and damage, then only conquering or agreeing that we will limit our 1.5 degree temperature rise is not going to phase us. There is very weak text on that part. So we need to have kind of more ambitious targets because if you don't limit it, then your loss and damage eventually is going to increase in an inequitable way. That's the second thing. Third thing, there was no concurrence on climate finance. We have been hearing that $100 billion, which is again the roof, not the ceiling kind of thing, is on table. But when that money is going to see the day of the light. So those are few kind of setbacks. But one thing for sure that has come together is collective action. And second thing is collective action by the vulnerable hit. It is not that only the developed nations are kind of steering the conversation. Clearly, there is some sort of progress on that part. The other part is about how climate sensitive sectors should be looked into, providing more emphasis on agricultural sector with agriculture fund and other things. So that shows that we need to climate proof our lives, livelihood and economies, thereby not ignoring the infrastructure development or the developmental trajectories. The other thing that I will just touch upon, of course, we are going to discuss later, is around the fossil fuel phase down, right? There was a breach of the Glasgow Pact, which was again a setback. But to be very honest, that's not a big surprise that has come down, although it's a big disappointment.
Certainly. And how is it going to impact our fight against climate change at a time when we need to accelerate, action against climate change, given the climate crisis we are in? We have, chosen to actually not address all of these aspects. Mr. Rajawat, coming to you, when we talk about collective action, operationalization of the loss and damage agreement is going to be critical. So in that regard, what are the issues which are going to be in focus? How are we going to, bring all of these countries together? Because as Mr. Mohanty just mentioned, climate finance has been talked about for so long. There is no money on the table. Loss and damage is something that is being talked about for 3 decades. Fortunately, it's a big breakthrough as it's being described. But will we see something different now happening in the years to come?
Tina, the issue here is that, COP and all the previous meetings have mostly failed in meeting any multilateral agreement that could actually be implemented on the ground. And this is while, loss and damage fund has in COP27, they have not given any details about how it will function. They have not even given the size of the fund itself. They have basically given that responsibility to a transition committee that is going to set up and work on the details. And that committee will meet sometime, I think, before March 23, and it will be actually taken up. This loss and damage fund organization will be taken up in COP28, which is next year, at the same time, in October 2023. So what we are seeing is that, from one committee meeting to another committee meeting, like it happens in most bureaucracy, things are just getting transferred. COP26 was a complete washout. The only difference between COP26 and COP27 is that, there has been something has been agreed upon, and that is the loss and damage fund. Something have been kind of detailed to be agreed upon. Most importantly, the 1.5 degree cap has been, has remained where it is.
Yes.
So, there is. If you look at the activists, or if you look at the people who have been covering COP20, COP meetings for the last, say, 12, 14 years, they see no change. The 1.5 degree cap was first suggested in 2008. And it's 14 years since that cap was agreed. Loss and damage has been discussed for almost a decade now. Okay, and we've now reached a state where they said, okay, fine, we will do something around that fund. And your question is very legitimate, and that's a question that everybody is asking: that who will get the damage? What will be the damage? Which are the vulnerable countries? How will you decide the vulnerability?
Right.
Will it be decided upon the extent of the damage? That means after the damage is done, or will you give them for mitigating the damage? These are all details that should should have been agreed upon, in my opinion, 10 years back. I mean, but still, I mean, not to sound pessimistic about the whole thing. They have moved like a committee. The glacier has moved 1 inch in 1 year, and maybe it will move another inch in the next year. But the fact is that climate change is not waiting for COP to decide
Absolutely.
whether they will move or not. Climate change is no longer climate change. As the UN Secretary-General rightfully said, that either we sign a pact for solidarity for change, or we sign a collective suicide pact. And it seems that in spite of the exhortations of numerous activists, including young people, somehow it doesn't get through to countries at a multilateral level that this is important. Then we need to actively work on it. The estimates which have been, I will give you one example. The adaptation fund, for which they have agreed to collect $230 million. Okay, that's the total collected in the adaptation fund. Okay, the requirement for transitioning from a low carbon economy to transition to a low carbon economy runs into $4 to $6 trillion a year, against which a fund of $100 billion was suggested in 2020. Nothing has happened on that fund itself. That fund remains on paper. There's been no collection or no indication of how it will function.
Certainly. So every year we are seeing at every summit, big promises are being made by developed countries. The vulnerable countries, this time, Dr. Dhawan, drawing comfort from the fact that at least its mission 30 years accomplished. They had been talking about loss and damage agreement for the last 3 decades. And the fact that this agreement has been reached upon. But till the time the finer details are missing, it's too early to celebrate. The fact that, the year 2022 itself has been devastating for the world over. Countries across different parts of the world have had adverse impacts of climate change, extreme weather events, be it Europe, be it Asia, be it Africa. The largest climate conference has nothing on, greater action on reducing emissions, has nothing concrete to provide when it comes to cutting down on fossil fuels. Is that a big disappointment, especially coming at a time when we say that we are in a climate emergency?
Absolutely. In fact, the point which was made just now by Mr. Rajavat, what is happening today world over? And that is the extremes, like IPCC reports, they have predicted something that this is what is going to happen if there is increase of 1.5 degrees. We are already above over 1 degree has already occurred. And we are still talking about, will we be able to curb it at 1.5? And whatever was expected, the actual results are more horrifying. It is that we have to, it is not save the planet. If the human race has to survive, the early action is required, and that is being neglected. We always say prevention is better than cure. What are we talking about? We are talking about a fund. You have suffered a loss, I'll compensate you, which that compensation actually is not adequate. It is of no use for those who have gone. So, and the kind of sufferings, like if we look at India and many other countries which are going to suffer, we are talking about loss of agriculture productivity. Because of increased temperatures, perhaps productivity of each one of us is going to reduce. We talk only of agriculture crops, the wheat and maize kind. We are not talking about horticultural species. Where will apple come from? Poor trees, they are at one place, they live for 40 years, and temperature is gradually rising. And when we say the global action, it is not occurring. Today, we have gone into an era of intellectual property rights. We want to earn. If I have developed a clean technology, I don't want to use it for the benefit of mankind. I want to get maximum dollars out of it. Yes. What we require today is technology sharing, co-development of technologies, because technology developed for large corporates, large companies, industries, may not work for small and medium enterprises in developing world. So the technology has to be developed, co-developed and put to use. And rightly said, no one is putting any money on the table. And sometimes I feel maybe COP has become more of a platform of negotiation, where you take care of that interests of my country are taken care of. Perhaps the expectation is not that something will come out. It will be nothing should go against me. So rather than that, the entire thing should be more towards what corrective actions we need to take.
That's right.
And that is also in terms of technology transfer. It is in terms of co-developing technology and also change in mindset, because greener doesn't mean always expensive. It can also be, it's a change in attitude that you require. The slogan that our Prime Minister has given on life, and that is that you have to live sustainably, which a character which is engraved in every Indian. So it has to become a movement. We all contribute to climate change, the way we have started living in the recent past, and we all suffer because of that climate. So let's not also leave it that what is happening at COP, perhaps we have to act locally and we have to find solutions. Let's not wait that some assistance is going to come from the other world or developed world. We have to create our own technologies. We have to work towards it.
True. That's been India's approach, and the thrust of this government has been on life, living sustainably. But Mr. Mohanty, the fact that challenges one after the other that the world is facing are not local but global in nature, and the solutions will not be local, they will have to be global in nature. We are all interconnected. We've seen that happen during the times of the COVID pandemic, then as an aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine war. So in this interconnected world, we cannot be isolated. Solutions will have to be global. But as Dr. Dhawan pointed out, increasingly the countries are becoming more and more protectionist. So IPR is something that we are still reeling under at a time when the United Nations talks about global solidarity. We are, actually racing against and fighting against IPR. So technology transfer seems to be a very, very distant thing to talk about. What is the way forward? One planet which we all have to save. There is no planet. As an activist, as someone who's, done so much research on the way forward, how do you look at the next decade?
Well, if I have to put down, then 3 A's are required. 3 A's: availability, accessibility, and accountability, right? Availability, accessibility, and accountability of system where policies and schemes are adequate enough, where the marginal communities and the most hit and most affected communities have a voice to represent, and the policies act as enablers, not as kind of bending them down. So number one. Number two is there has to be financial innovations, and access to finance is more important. While you have an access to finance, you need to make people available to those finances so that they can A, build resilience, adapt to the changing climate, C, they can have a just transition. And the whole concept of this COP negotiation is about helping the most needed, providing the food where the mouth is and who is actually hungry. We can't kind of shift our goalpost every time in every COP. So in order to make them, I think 3 A's are important. While we are doing that, as Dr. Dhawan has said, the technology needed, which is kind of, rather than getting into the tussle or tug of war between technology transfer and so on and so forth, that accountability has to be there. Countries have to come together, because whatever is a problem, let me just put numbers into perspective. Why India has been establishing itself as a thought leader and not relying just in COP, rather have a greater voice at the COP negotiations or platforms like this. Aligning with COP, we have G20, summit, which is just kind of started, and India's presidency under G20 is going to be very crucial, where concurrence around track of disaster risk reduction, climate convergence, and governance is going to be very important. At the same time, the renewable transition that we are talking of is going to be very important. So G20 countries are the kind of countries which are developing. They have their own developmental trajectories, and they need to kind of shift into a greener and cleaner version of developmental trajectory. But while they are doing that, they also need to provide support to small island developing states. And it's a wonderful move that G77 countries have come together to echo the voice on loss and damage, although it has taken more than 3 decades, Mr. Rawat, to just finalize loss and damage coming into the text or having that acknowledgement on paper. So I think 3 A's is something that we should look forward between Sharm el-Sheikh and Dubai, rather than just shifting our goalpost and being very cognizant of what Dr. Dhawan has said, that at COP negotiations, every country has to safeguard its interest only. Okay. While you are safeguarding your interest in developmental trajectory, you need to understand that you have a bigger role to play, like India doing it with ISA, International Solar Alliance, doing it with Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Now the IRIS has been launched last year. This year it is becoming operational with the Life movement, where the citizens have to come up and provide that global movement and a way of living into making the just transition and climate proofing life's livelihood and economics. I think this kind of leapfrogging step is required from the other developed and developing countries. Okay. Then only I think we can achieve the 3 A's within the COP framework and not have this conversation. Rather, next year around this time, we can have a celebrated kind of conversation that yes, this COP was good for people and planet.
Too early to say that, Mr. Mohanty, given the way and the pace at which the world is moving. But taking on from what you said, the 3 A's, Mr. Rajawat, accountability is something which is required at this moment. So for the developing world, actually, one of their demands has been met in terms of the loss and damage agreement. But they've also been demanding a restructuring, perhaps some kind of reforms in the financial institutions, in the manner in which funding is provided to them to become resilient, to deal with the climate crisis. How are we moving towards that aspect, number one? And how do you look at the way forward in terms of making them resilient, if at all, given the crisis we're in?
It's very easy to say that, you can change the nature of financial institutions by law or by a committee. It's impossible for a bank to kind of start lending to innovation or start lending to a project which is, say, for renewable energy, until there is economic return to the bank. And that economic return has to be, above the so-called cost of capital. So whenever we talk about climate change or we talk about climate crisis and we talk about change in the financial system, we need to look at the economic system that is already running behind it. Unless until the change is initiated in the economic system, for instance, let me give you an example to illustrate that. If we need electric vehicles, then we need to, our objective, if it is to move away from fossil fuels, and we need to move away from internal combustion engine to electric vehicle, then we need to create an economic system which will incentivize the use, production of electric vehicle. We need to move away from the lobby of IC engine companies per se, if we want to move away from the fossil fuel economy. Now expecting that we will give an incentive to the IC companies and they will move to the EV world is not possible. So we need to create a new economic system where we create incentives and advantages for the EV companies. And that is only how you can change the fundamental finance structure. Then only banks or any financial institution will find it relevant and profitable enough to lend to the EV company. So it's not an exercise in isolation where you say that we will create a larger fund of, say, even if you created $100 billion fund, it's little like a drop in the ocean for funding innovation. You have to allow the natural entrepreneurship spirit of entrepreneurs to exercise it in the interest of profit. And that exercise of interest in profit can only happen if policy changes at national level itself.
Certainly.
We
So
still don't have a
well-structured framework is required that can have their desired outcome. Dr. Dhawan, time allows me to take up just one last comment from you. So the bottom line is time is running out. The need is to have all hands on the deck, which will drive climate justice and climate ambitions, which at this point in time appear to be too huge. What is the way forward? How can at least, I mean, you suggested local solutions. The last few years, India has set high goals for itself. So if we look at our population, given the vulnerable position we are in, what is the best way forward?
I must compliment both government and the corporate sector in India. Government had set up rules, and I'm very happy that most of the corporates, they are intending to be net zero by 2040, 2050. So they are setting up that kind of deadlines for themselves. So we are moving in the right direction. The only thing we should go ahead is that how do we bring SMEs? So large companies definitely will take care of. It is SMEs to whom we have to make the technology available. And that is where I say the hydrogen mission, that's a good step. So we need to set up more like center of excellence and fine-tune the technology for the benefit of SMEs. So we are moving right, and I think the way we will be evolving in the near future, that will ensure that we meet all the targets, or rather surpass the deadlines that has been set
So we
up.
are on the right path. Perhaps the need of the hour is to accelerate the pace in order to meet our ambitions. So that having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. Thank you, Mr. Rajawat, Mr. Mohanty, and Dr. Dhawan for joining us on the program, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. Viewers, thank you to you as well for your time. I'll see you same time tomorrow now. You take care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.